Cities in the United States used to be wealthy. This is what they looked like in the early 20th century. There were people, there was activity. Small cities too. Providence, Buffalo, New Haven, Cincinnati. Wealth created in a city used to be retained by the people who lived in that city. The owner of your grocery store was your neighbor. The senior management of the largest companies in your city also lived in your city. The revenue businesses earned in your city was deposited in banks located in your city, owned by people in your city, and employed by people in your city. So why did wealth leave cities? Wealth left cities for the same reasons it concentrated in cities. After World War II, the transportation and economic forces that drove people and wealth into the city moved rapidly in the opposite direction, outside the city. I'll focus on 3 reasons of why wealth left cities. The first is the change in business ownership structures from family-owned and operated and sole proprietors to a publicly traded company. Prior to World War I, most businesses were sole proprietors or partnerships. The majority of dollars spent by people inside of a city were on individually owned or family-owned businesses. Your grocer, retailer, and hardware store were all owned by people who lived in your city. Today, your grocer, retailer, and hardware store are publicly traded companies. They're owned and headquartered in another city. Decisions on your local store are being made in a corporate headquarters outside of your city. Today, you might buy your groceries from Whole Foods, which is headquartered in Austin, Texas, your clothes from Target, which is headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and maybe your tools from Home Depot, which is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. At the turn of the 20th century, you would have known the streets of where the owner of your grocer, retailer, and hardware store lived. Your kids would have gone to school with each other. You would have patronized their businesses, and they would patronize your business. The success of your neighborhood was the success of their neighborhood. They wanted safe and active neighborhoods because the success of the city was also the success of their business. They were just as invested in your city as you were. The urban economy was made up of a number of small businesses that really created a ownership class as a part of the social fabric of cities. Because businesses were often family-owned and operated, their value to the neighborhood was in their relationships with their neighbors. Businesses were committed to their place and the people living in them. Again, a city's decline or their neighborhood's decline meant their business's extinction. Businesses also served as the center of communication because they were located within working class neighborhoods, as opposed to today's shopping plazas. Cities had a mixture of uses in transit-oriented development before those phrases were even invented by planners. Bank portfolios at this time often consisted of safe, moderate profit loan portfolios, as opposed to chasing the highest return available at a national scale. They didn't resell a local mortgage on a secondary market. They were local banks making local transactions and invested in the local community in which they operated. Now when dollars are spent at a chain located in a city, that money actually leaves the city. The ownership of that business isn't located in that city. You live next to store number 1000, not store number 1 of 1. Chains also react to national economic trends as opposed to neighborhood needs. The way businesses were owned changed significantly in the late 19th century, moving from family-owned and operated to the joint stock corporation. The change in the way businesses were owned in the late 19th century decentralized wealth away from the center city and almost entirely from smaller industrialized cities. Firms were historically small when cities had wealth because no firm had the organizational capacity to manage a workforce of 50,000 people, nor were they able to harness enough energy to manufacture or distribute goods nationally or even worldwide. Around 1910, direct ownership was displaced as the center of the American economy by the Joint Stock Corporation and its associated institutions such as the New York Stock Exchange. Equity markets helped raise capital, giving way to the first big business in America, the railroad. The railroad created the corporate model we know today. No individual or partnership could fund a railroad project on its own. It needed capital in large quantities that were supplied through corporate stocks and bonds. Joint stock companies started to scale production like never before, building large factories that could manufacture products and distribute them worldwide. At first, these businesses were still dependent on a centralized urban economy and centralized urban development. They needed labor and capital in close proximity to one another. Some of the companies starting at this time are businesses we still know to this day: U.S. Steel, Standard Oil, Coca-Cola, Sears Roebuck, General Electric, Pepsi, Goodyear, Ford, 3M, Black & Decker, and IBM. All of these corporations were founded between 1880 and 1920. These companies, while distributing worldwide, were still very much local. They were still investing in the cities in which they were headquartered. They were selling products worldwide, but pumping that money back into the streets of their local economy. The growth of these corporations signaled stability as they continued to invest in capital in a city. It signaled to other people and other businesses that a city is safe to invest in. This resulted in more capital investments in the form of buildings, homes, city infrastructure, all in the center city. At this point in American history, wealth hadn't yet left the city. If you're interested in the rise and decline of cities, I highly recommend reading City, Urbanism, and Its End by WWII. A link to buy this book will be in the video description. It's one of the foundational books for my understanding of how cities, especially New England cities, grew and peaked in wealth and population, and then the forces that resulted in their decline. Subscribe to City Glow Up if you're interested in the intersection of cities, economics, government, and planning.